Hello, hello. It's a pleasure to see you here today, folks. Welcome, welcome. I'm a little bit late today, but that's the story of my life. Kind of trying out some new technology here. I'm using StreamYard. Uh, and my name is Dustin Cormier. Today, we are going to be checking out the one and only Nakshatra. Gosh, I gotta get my stuff quick here. Let's see. Still learning to use my new technology here. I'm going to share my screen. We are checking out Swati Nakshatra today. And at some point, I'm going to be able to show that. Yeah. Swati Nakshatra. This is part of our 27 Nakshatra series. In particular, we're going to be discussing the Swati Nakshatra native and using what we know from the Taittiriya Brahmana to describe the character quality of this native. Swati is ruled by the deity Vayu, the god of wind, and it's often symbolized as a little piece of grass or a sprout, a tiny sprout of a plant that is being blown in the wind and sort of has that capacity to be taken by the wind. Hello, Coco Monroe. It's nice to see you here today. So this is a live stream, folks. Coco Monroe, it looks like you're saying that you have Grand Rising. I wonder if you mean that you have Swati as your rising sign. Let me know if that's the case, because I always love to know if people relate personally to the sign we're talking about today. But I digress. It's a pleasure to see you here, folks. This is a live stream. We're going to be reading from my own sort of derived notes. And as well, we're going to be reading from 3 texts in particular today. One of them is Ernst Wilhelm's Energies of the 27 Lunar Mansions. We also have Vic Dicara's Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. And finally, The Divine Forces of the Lunar Nakshatras by Radhe. So let's dig in here, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. I have been excited to do Swati. Swati is an interesting character, very Vata, very windy, and we're going to talk about all things related to Swati. So let's get rocking, and let's start to get into my presentation. So, I'm getting used to how I'm supposed to use my technology here. Here we go. Sweet. So, of course, this is part of our 27 Nakshatra series. I am a tropical Vedic astrologer, for everyone who's interested. I do not practice sidereal astrology. I'm a Western-based astrologer who is combining tropical astrology and introducing the Vedic idea of astrology into my Western practice. So I'm somebody who overlays the 12 tropical signs with the 27 nakshatras. And if anybody's interested in the tropical sidereal debate, you can check out my long video. It's Age of Aquarius Debunked, which is all about that subject. And I have another video just called Age of Aquarius Debunked, similar, which is about an hour and a half. It's my best work. I highly recommend it. Now, this is a little story that I often give, and, you know, somebody has given me the idea that this story is not used just for this meaning or example. But I like to give it. It's essentially Vishnu stepped on this dwarf's head, and Vishnu took 3 steps. And the 3 steps represent 3 separate phases of the astrological Jyotish, the world of astral karma. Those 3 steps also mean more than that, but this is just a metaphor that I often use. And it basically goes to show that there's a difference between the nakshatras of deep space, it's the stars. Then there's the local space created by the solar ecliptic, that's the 12 signs of the tropical zodiac. And then there's geomantic space of the horizon, the houses, the cusps, the angles and trines, etc. So these are 3 dimensions of the astrology chart, and they're all separate. So my intention in this essay is to convey that the nakshatras are their own deep space segment of the sky. They are not married to the rashis or the signs. That's one of the main pictures that I try to give in this series. And I should say to anybody interested, I also have another video in this series describing a little bit more detail about this difference between what the classical people define as the nakshatras and what us modern neo-tropical Vedic astrologers associate it with. And this is the same thing that we've got going on here. I say this in every introduction, so check out the intro of my series to see a little bit more detail about what we're talking about here. But I'm only going to give it in brief because this is just one of our 27 videos. The most authentic and undistorted literature we have available on the nakshatras comes from this certain text known as the Taittiriya Brahmana. It's a commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda and is in some ways said to be a continuation of it. It contains the seeds of the consciousness that first perpetuated the nakshatras. And it's important to say at this point that the nakshatras, in fact, are something that, I should keep this like this. The nakshatras are something that have been worked through for a very long time. The nakshatras are really amongst the oldest of astrological underpinnings. The idea of the horoscope was something that came very late in the astrological schema in history. The horoscope, the idea that I was born on this day at this hour and the planets were placed this way and it means something to my soul. That's something that wasn't really thought about until like 500 BC. The Zodiac existed before 500 BC. There's evidence of a Zodiac existing 1000 BC, 1500 BC, but it was more had to do with, trying to divine weather patterns, trying to figure out trends in society on a larger collective sort of thing. And as well, it would seem that the nakshatras are even older than that. The nakshatras come from Vedic culture from about 2,000 years ago. And it's Vedic culture that gave the nature of the nakshatras. And one of the first instances of the nakshatras in a compiled compendium comes from this text, the Taittiriya Brahmana. And that's why we give it such importance. Oh, thank you, Coco Monroe, for clarifying. You've been hit with heavy winds lately, and so hearing about Swati and Vayu, its deity, is some good timing. Hello, Zem. I hope I'm saying your name right. Hello, Stephen the Jupiterian. And West Pole. A few of my friends who are always hanging out with me. It's nice to see you guys on here. Now, to continue on here, this is a little bit more in the nature of the distortion that we're talking about. And this is something, again, you can see in that first video in the series. The 27 nakshatras have been conveyed through Indian astrology. The Indian continent is really latched onto its own astrological tradition, where it's always been assumed that the stars are what makes the zodiac signs. And so the zodiac has been married to the stars in the sidereal tradition. And of course, the stars are the nakshatras. But the solar ecliptic of the zodiac, in modern times, in today's time, it's considered to be something that moves along the background of the stars due to the precession of the equinox. Now, those people in India who, for a long time, had the idea that the stars were married to the signs, they've given all of the nakshatras the certain associations that relate to the sign. For example, Swati is considered to be in the old days, Swati was considered to be in Libra. But of course, as we're going to show, in today's time, Swati is considered to be closer to the first degrees of Scorpio. It's about from 0 degrees Scorpio to about 14 degrees of Scorpio. But in the old days, it was considered to be like Libra, having the airy quality of Libra. But the airy quality of Swati Nakshatra has nothing to do with Libra. So this is part of the distortion. As well, again, you can check out that other intro video in the series where we talk about the Vimshotari Lord. It's the planet that rules the first dasha period when the moon falls in that nakshatra. So when the moon falls into, oh, it's not going to say it on here, but when the moon falls into Swati, a certain dasha will occur as the first dasha in a person's life. And we want to make sure that we don't consider Swati Nakshatra to be intrinsically married to that either, because Vimshotari was created long after the nakshatras were created. So we're getting into the essence of the nakshatras here, the very primordial essence in a Vedic way, which has nothing to do with horoscopes and more to do with Vedic deities. Now, these are two different ayanamshas, and we can see that these ayanamshas are very different. Ernst has a sort of ovular nakshatra idea. You know, we can see, for example, in both systems, Kritika is about 20 degrees of Taurus. But in Vic's system, Magha is 24 degrees Leo, and Magha is 16 degrees of Leo for Ernst. So the tropical points for these nakshatras are very different according to these two guys who are sort of the patriarchs of tropical Vedic astrology on YouTube right now. So for our sake, for Swati, it doesn't matter too much because they're both very close in both of these two gentlemen's systems. Swati is about 0 degrees Scorpio, and that's in Vic's system. And in Ernst's system, Swati is about 19 degrees of Libra. Right? Cool. My friend Xem, it's almost like you're mentioning that your name almost has the X in it, so Xem. Thank you for confirming that. So it's nice to see West Pole Astro Geek. Oh, we have somebody who has their ascendant in Swati. That's Astro Geek. Very good, Astro Geek. I hope you enjoy the session and enjoy what we kind of get through here. Om Swati. Thanks for everybody for watching here. Now, let's move into our next discussion. We're going to be getting into the 4 classical nakshatra characteristics. And of course, I've put in all this effort to describe how the Taittiriya Brahmana is the essential source of Vedic conveyance for the nature of these nakshatras. Now, these 4 qualities are something I want to mention first, because this has been given in the Indian tradition and Indian literature as descriptions of the nakshatras. But they may have been culled by intuitive, licentious writers based on these distortion points we've already described. So we don't know how much of what we're about to read is debatable, whether it actually has nothing to do with the nature of the nakshatras. I've found that much of it does have something to do with the intrinsic nature of the nakshatras. These 4 in particular are the ones that I have felt in my intuition to be closest to the original nature of the nakshatra given in the Vedas. It's the activity, the 7 qualities of the nakshatras, the sexual yoni animal, and the kingdom. A lot of these are just come from mathematical relationships of the nakshatras. There's 27 of them, so there's lots of trines. There's not exactly squares, because squares are based on the factor of 4. You can't divide 27 into 4, so there's not really squares, but there is trines in nakshatras. That's where the activity comes from. The kingdom is animal, plant, mineral, So when you go through the list of nakshatras, it goes animal, plant, mineral, animal, plant, mineral, animal, plant, mineral, the whole way down. So that's its own interesting thing. And there's the sexual yoni animal, which is used in traditional marriage assessment. These are all very interesting things, and that's why I have brought them up here so that we can decide and discern for ourselves what seems to be useful and what seems not. So Swati is considered to be one of the chara, the movable or ephemeral nakshatras. And this has there's 5 nakshatras that are grouped in this way, which is interesting. It's almost, this is one of the qualities of nakshatra that have each of the animal kingdoms inside it. So along with all these, Swati is considered chara, movable. We're going to learn that the deity of Swati, which is Vayu, the god of air, is very changeable. It can move, it can change around with things, but this is actually part of the quality of Swati that can be to its detriment if it doesn't ground itself. This is a very movable, transformative nakshatra, and it helps to transform society in a lot of ways. Oh, we do have the ancient ruler here. This is what I was talking about with the dasha. If the moon falls into Swati, then you will begin your life under the dasha of Rahu. And some say that the Swati, therefore, has Rahu in its nature. It's debated, so I want everybody to keep that in mind. So we're not sure how much Swati really has to do with the quality of Rahu. But in any case, the movable nature of Swati, like all of these nakshatras, can be useful. Swati's a mover and a shaker, but it also can be to the detriment of Swati if it is not kept mindful of how that character quality can be overblown. Personality can be a yoga in its own way. It can be something that you need to unite to the essential source of the universe by moving beyond character quality. And sometimes in order to get beyond character quality, you have to invoke that which is the character qualities that you're lacking. So Swati does very well to be rooted. It's interesting that it has for its symbol a tiny little sprout. It shows that Swati actually wants to be rooted. And we're going to kind of talk about that as we go along. In order to be the little sprout that gets moved by the wind, it needs to have roots. Really, the movable nature of Swati only serves Swati if Swati can remain rooted, grounded, develop on some kappa, develop on some stability in their lives so they don't get blown away by the cosmic wind of their fascination and their ideas and their genius of the air element. Swati belongs to the jiva, the animal kingdom. Of course, we can see here all 3 of the different animal kingdom natures. This is one that Ernst Wilhelm has actually described a little bit in his website. Ernst Wilhelm has a website where he describes the different natures of the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms. It's Dhatu, Mula, and Jiva. That's mineral, plant, and animal. So I'm going to answer West Pole in just a moment. The nature of these kingdoms, Ernst describes as being similarly related to the grouping of cardinal, fixed, and mutable in the astrological zodiac. The cardinal signs are Dhatu, which is mineral, and they are into minerals. They're into the material world. If you add a mechanic, the mechanic is the example I always use. If you had a mechanic who didn't focus on other businesses around, they just knew that they found a diamond mine, or they found a junkyard, they found some place where there's cars and used cars all around, and they can go and talk to the other people around them in order to get those minerals there. They might not be business savvy. The Dhatu people are just more into the mineral material world and digging into it. The Mula people are in the middle of the Dhatu and the Jiva. The Mula people, the plant people, are a little bit more savvy. This is like a mechanic who's a businessman who knows how to find materials, resources, can dig into the earth, find minerals that relate to their craft, and find old junkyards and bring their cars to them. But the Mula people also have a little bit of business savvy, where they understand people, they understand trends a little bit, and Mula people are really the in-between of the mineral world and the Jiva world, the entertainment world. Jiva is an entertainer. Jiva is a politician. Jiva is the animal kingdom, and this is what our present nakshatra abides by. Our present nakshatra is considered to be in the animal, the Jiva kingdom. And so it's the Jiva people who are, again, they're politicians, they are human savvy. They pay attention to global trends, and they say this is where humanity is going. This is where this business is going. These are the things that our business should be paying attention to. And so the Jiva people are very important in this regard as movers. Again, Swati is a mover and shaker, and it's a ideological, political one. It is amongst the Chara people who are shaking things around. Swati and Shatabhishek both have this quality of using their ability to either manipulate, sometimes for positive reasons. Politics is full of people who sometimes will mentally arm wrestle you, and sometimes you have to have the ability to mentally arm wrestle in order to do good things in the world of politics. This is the animal people. This is Jiva. And Swati can have this kind of brilliance. So I hope that that's clear in describing the nature of the Jiva nature of Swati. Now, just to make a quick mention of some of the things that are being asked here, my friend West Pole has asked, how ancient are the ancient rulers? Do they have modern counterparts? So I believe that West Pole is referring to these ancient rulers. Now, again, I would say we can't spend too much time on it, but the whole reason for me doing this series is because I'm taking from the Taittiriya Brahmana, which is a Vedic scripture that was written at a time when horoscopes were not a thing. Now, this ancient ruler, where we see that, again, what happens is when you're born, we have something in Vedic astrology called Vimshotari, and that's the dashas. The dashas are this thing where it's like another time clock. It's another version of transits in Vedic astrology, and it's considered very important. Somebody mentioned that they're in the Rahu dasha. I think it might have been West Pole. Let's see, somebody did, but that's okay. So the dashas are a part of horoscope astrology, which was created in India probably like 500 BC to 0 AD, possibly even further than that. The nakshatras from the Taittiriya Brahmana were created 2000 BC. So there's a more intrinsic, purely Vedic rendering of the nakshatras that comes from the Taittiriya Brahmana. Now, these ancient rulers, this idea that Swati, where it comes from is that if you're born with the moon in Swati, Rahu will be your first dasha. So people say there must have something to do with the nature of Rahu in Swati. And there may be truth to it. But as for our case, in these videos, we're not interested in this later derivation, this later idea of Swati. We're trying to get to the old ancient Vedic roots of what Swati is. That's what we're doing in this series. I hope that answers your question, West Pole. Let me know if that did the trick for you. So let's start digging into the sutra structure of the Taittiriya Brahmana. I say this in every video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. We have the true nakshatra name at the top, and this, of course, comes from Vic Dicara. Vic Dicara has his own website where he has a wonderful course on the nakshatras. I haven't even gone fully through it. There's going to come a point where I have to start digging through that again in order to keep up on the nature of the nakshatras I haven't gone through yet. It's a very good course. It's better than anything you're going to find on my channel. I recommend it. Now, the deity which rules the nakshatra is going to be in pink. The name of the nakshatra is going to be in white, and this is the name of the nakshatra, but sometimes obscure names are used to give more information. And there's a reason for this. These are sutras, folks. So the nature of a sutra is it's kind of like the tip of an iceberg. You see these words and you just think they're words, but there's an encoded message that runs through the depth of the iceberg, even though all you see is the sutra on the surface, right? This is how sutras work. You know, when you think about it, like a doctor uses a sutra to tie together a wound in your arm. Sutra is like the doctor's sutra that ties up the wound. So you see the sutra on the front, but there's actually much depth to the cut. It goes much deeper than what you see as the sutra on the surface. The reason for this, there's a very specific reason why the sutras are made in this way. It's because back in the ancient days, back in 4,000 years ago, in 2000 BC, there was hardly any writing. There was no printing presses. So this is back in the day where people were still using mantras to contain their information. And this is a time when the Brahmins and the channelers of this divine information and insight had to do something to encode, to really bring together the meanings of the nakshatras. It's a stitch. So also, how that would work in the old days is that they would say, okay, everybody, we're going to do the song and then we're going to talk about it and do commentary on it. So let's all get together and go through the stotra. Let's go through the main sutram. This is the Taittiriya Brahmana. These are these sutras. They wanted to make them short so that for practical sake, so that they could memorize them, so that they could keep them in their minds. And in order to make them short, they had to use very specific encoded language in order to bring about that, you know, they wanted to use words that are, again, the tip of an iceberg, so your imagination could fill in the rest of the iceberg. And then they could just quickly go, you know, it's a brilliant mnemonic device of quantifying information at a time when there was no paper. You know, it really shows a bid towards quality of information rather than today's quantities of information. You know, it's a beautiful way to think about information. So this is the nature of these sutras. We have the deity that rules the nakshatra. We have the name of the nakshatra. We have in yellow what's called the foundation from above. This is what's needed for the nakshatra to function properly. It's something that we want to get into experience in the nakshatra, and that's what is signified by parastad. The foundation above is what's needed for the nakshatra in order for it to flow from above into a positive result down below. And that's yajamana. So this is ultimately what the nakshatra aims to do, aims to get, aims to produce. So we need the yellow word, the parastat, in order to produce the blue word with these nakshatras. And that's how the flow for all these nakshatra goes. So let's start digging in here, and let's start looking at this is the sutra for Swati. Now, for some reason, I've given myself a note. I wonder if I should check it first. Ah, yes. Yeah, we'll get there. Let's see. Do I give myself that note again? Yes, I do. Okay, good. First, before we check out that note, let us involve ourselves, engage with the tip of the iceberg so that our own imaginations can fill in the rest of the iceberg. Let us go through the sutra. Let the sacred vibrations of these words get soaked into our minds, bodies, and memory so that the essential code of the universe that Swati is may come through our own nervous system. Because this is the best way to absorb the knowledge, because all knowledge is rooted within us. We are connected to the universe. We are connected to all knowledge. And it's through mantra that we remember the inherent aspect of the universe that we are connected with. And Swati is very much one of them. Just like in astrology where we say, if you've got no planets in Scorpio, Scorpio is still operating in you. In the same way, even if you've got no planets or cusps in Swati, Swati is still one of the symbols of universal knowledge. So let's get into it. Now, Vic Dicara on his website, on his YouTube channel, if you look up Swati, you'll hear this mantra again, just in case I do it wrong. I try to really digest it in order to be able to do it. But Sanskrit is not my first language, but I'm going to do my best with it. So this is the sutra. Vayornistya vratatih parastat asidhir avastat Vayornistya vratatih parastat asidhir avastat. You'll notice that the h has got, the h has got a little dot underneath it. That little dot indicates that there's a aspirated E vowel sound that comes after the H. So let's do it one more time. Vayornistya vratatah parastat asidhiravastat. Beautiful. Now, I'm inclined to think that we should go through it. Yeah, let's do the sutra first, and then I'm going to go check out that note that I gave myself here on page 90. All right, so let's start digging a little bit into what exactly is being described in this sutra. Now, this derivation, as I might have shown before, this is coming from Ernst Wilhelm. We have two derivations that we're coming from. One is from Ernst Wilhelm, and the other is from Vic Dicara. As I said, these are kind of the two guys. These are the guys. The two dudes who have been perpetuating tropical Vedic astrology for a long time. For all of us. They're the main dudes. I wonder if you guys can see me there. No, good. So, of these two, we're going to begin with Ernst Wilhelm. Now, this actually comes from a PDF that Ernst Wilhelm gives for free online. You can look it up on Google. You look up the energies of the 27 lunar mansions. And it's on there that Ernst gives his very own derivation of the sutra. Now, let's keep in mind when we're doing sutra, anybody who translates it into English can go one of two ways. And that's why we do two different translations. You can keep it very brusquely, like absolutely enigmatically close to the definition. You know, Ernst here, as we can see, we're going to read these little English translations, and they don't exactly flow together because they weren't intended to flow in English. When we get into Vic's description, we're going to see Vic makes it in a way in English that we can understand, but Ernst keeps it enigmatic because he wants you to understand what each word means, to put it in the flow of the sutra, and then to use your imagination to really grip what the original author was trying to say without him filling in the blanks for you. Ernst doesn't fill in the blanks. Ernst just gives you the raw data. And that's what we're seeing here in his translation of this sutra. Then when we get to Vic, it'll be broken down in a little bit more of a relatable way. So here we have Vayur, meaning, of course, of Vayu, the god of wind. And Nistya is plural. It means strange, foreign things, or strange things. So the strange things, the strange foreign things of the wind, that's what we're reading here. When we look in Vic's thing, he kind of says that the wind is the thing that's sort of carrying away or causing things to be estranged and foreign. We could almost say that the wind, there's an aspect of the wind that brings foreign things. It has a foreignness to it. There is a foreignness to the wind. It does, of course, come from all corners of the earth every time it meets our faces. Now, let's look at the Vratitah. This is the thing that is the foundation above. So, for Swati, for the strange foreign things of the wind, it needs spreading and expansion. Of course, this makes sense, and Vratitah has the V in it, which implies usually a momentum of velocity. Our English word velocity contains it, vehicle. Convey, it has a virility to it. So Vratitah is a spreading and expanding. So Swati, to function, needs a sort of a spreading and expanding in order to have and produce asiddhir. So asiddh is a non-accomplishment. It's a failure, or it's an imperfection. Isn't that interesting? Why would the wind want to, why would this be in the production phase? Why would asiddhir be something we would desire to produce? Well, we're going to learn about the nature of Swati. We're going to learn that Swati is looking to rout out the things that don't work, the things that are imperfect, the things that are fail. It's the spreading out and feeling out in the nervous system of an idea, of a person, of a system, of a job. Swati will never finally identify with any of them. And because they do, Swati is very sharp. They're a data collector. They are looking to be very specifically brusque and objective. They're the one person who will say in a situation the thing that might hurt someone's feelings but need to be said. And this is how I, of course, interpret this sutra. The strange things of Vayu, the wind, are from above a spreading and expanding, and from below this produces the non-accomplishment, failure, imperfection, or at least unveils imperfections so that they can be recognized. That is, again, my interpretation. Now let's see as we go along. We're going to find, I read a little bit of Vic's book, so bear in mind, this is kind of where I'm getting this idea, or how I'm interpreting Ernst's sutra here. So this comes from Vic's Nakshatra Sutra series. It's actually a course that he does on his website, and I very much highly recommend it. You can find it on vicdicara.com. So for Swati, here we see Vayu means wind. It's the god of the wind. Nistya means far off, foreign. Vratatihi means expand and extend or drift. There's an unusualness. There's a drifting from the norm that might be considered to be part of Vratatihi. And just like Ernst kind of intimated, Asiddhi means imperfection. So we see that the nakshatra of Vayu, which is Swati, is good for purifying and leaving bad things behind. The negative aspect of Swati is that they can be disloyal. This is, again, the person who you love so much. If you love somebody who will tell you that you got a piece of spinach in your teeth, you know, you got a big hunk of spinach in your teeth, and Swati will say, there's a thing in your teeth there. Stop, hold on, stop. There's that thing in your teeth? Yeah, before you keep talking, why don't you just pull that sucker right out of there? And everyone's like, whoa, sorry, Swati. But, you know, Swati's not doing it to even bring attention to itself. Although it probably can, possibly, if there are negative planet combinations here. Most times, Swati is just being brutally honest for the sake of being brutally honest. And this can cause disloyalty. You know, imagine you are a king, and the king doesn't want, you know, egg on his face. So Swati comes along and says, King, you've been doing everything pretty good, but I think that you should change this. This thing is really causing a lot of trouble in the kingdom. And the king's like, whoa, okay there. You know, like, if the king gets offended, you got to be careful you don't get your head lobbed off. You know, and this can come off as disloyal. Especially, again, if there's bad combinations of planets there, this disloyalty can grow into something worse. Swati probably can, at its worst, experience truth to the nth degree of feeling something out, challenging, because it's not even necessarily about truth so much as challenging. Swati could have the truth right in front of it, but it'll still challenge it. It's a good thing and a bad thing. Welcome to the nature of the wind. And of course, there's a drifting nature in Swati where they can drift away from the norm, but they can also drift away from the program. Come on, get with the program. Everyone's doing yoga in a yoga class, and everyone's moving together, and Swati is doing their own thing in the middle, kind of breaking up the pattern, but still, you know, like, if they're intelligent, they're still going to try and get the best they can out of that yoga class. But this is this drifting that can happen, drifting from the program. They can be unusual. Positively speaking, though, they move forward, leaving behind imperfections. And of course, because Swati is looking for to ultimately dig objectively beyond attachment to any thought or idea, Swati, like the wind, will not be stopped. And so therefore they can go very far. That's just part of the nistya, far off, foreign, going very far with things. The Swati character has a way of going very far in whatever it is that they want to get into, especially if there are positive planets associated with Swati. Now here we read that this is this sutra, there's two, so both of these come from Vic Dicara. He did his nakshatra course where he described it one way, and his nakshatra course, this is the blue, and this came first, and then afterwards Vic wrote his book Nakshatra, the Authentic Heart of Vedic Astrology. So this is a more concise reading is the second one. But I like to include the first one because it's got its own, it's usually more blown up and a little bit more crude, or a more enigmatic in the way that Ernst's is. So what we read is Vayu, the wind's ability to carry away, nistya. It needs to drift far away in order to carry away imperfections. And we hear a condensed version of this in the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, where Vic says the far-blowing wind needs to drift to produce imperfections. Asiddhir avastat. The far-blowing wind needs to drift for imperfections. For imperfections to be seen, for imperfections to be recognized and reckoned with, right? So, this is the nature, the quality of this nakshatra of Swati. Now, we're going to next start digging into Vic Dicara's work from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. It's our boy Vic here. You might recognize him from his own YouTube channel. And again, I don't mind being self-effacing in the face of him. I'm a student of his, and he's graced me with the ability to just have passionate fun talking about his derivations of these sutras. He does it on his own channel. He brings the Vedic lore into it, and he's the guy that I'm getting all this from, so take that however you will. That being said, I'm still grateful to be able to be on my own channel and carrying his torch through my own little candle. So, now we are looking now, you'll notice I made myself a little note here. This is page 190 of Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. So I'm going to get into page 90 now and talk about that little, there's a footnote that Vic gives. So what this is that when you read his book, you'll notice that there's not just the Nakshatra Sutra, there's also the true story of the Nakshatra Gods. And this is where Vic brings the whole narrative of all the gods, of all the Vedic gods mentioned in the Nakshatras. He weaves them all together into a story, a singular story. And that is what he's got, that's where this story comes from. So let's dig into it a little bit. We see Swati and Vayu relates to individualism in the Vedic pantheon. It is the individuator, as we're going to see. Now, Aditi, which rules Punarvasu, is the mother goddess of all the nakshatras and of all things. Brahma contains the potential for all forms of knowledge, wisdom, and phenomena. But Aditi is the tissue mother of nature, of earth, of space-time dimension, of 3 dimensions, of reality. Aditi is the mother that holds the tissue of Brahma's potentials. So Aditi mothered the Adityas, which are the sattvic gods in the pantheon. Aditi mothered the Vasu, which are the 8 elemental gods of the atmosphere, the Rajasic gods. And then Aditi also, I think the Vasu is actually the 3rd one. Let me make sure I'm not putting my foot in my mouth here. Right, yeah, excuse me. So the Adityas are the sattvic gods. The Rudras are the atmospheric gods that have this intense passion. And then the Vasus are the elemental gods, and these Vasus relates to the elements of earth and of nature. The air god, Vayu, is among the elemental gods. It is the tamasic. It's on the tamasic rung of the Vedic cosmology. Now, Vic tells us that air has two forms, wind and breath. In the form of wind, Vayu is extremely strong and adventurous, going boldly in its own direction. In the form of breath, Vayu keeps us alive, which we can describe more precisely as keeping our consciousness linked to our mind and body. It's truly alive, truly conscious, truly in our nervous systems. Vayu does this in the form of prana. It's oxygen and its metabolic derivatives, which links the nervous system to the supraphysical mental self, enabling the nervous system to regulate the circulatory system and thus control the body. Vayu, Vata, often also very much relates to Saturn. There's a real tie-in with Saturn in this individuation process. That's why we're going to learn that Saturn does well in Swati. Saturn is the planet that conveys the element of air. And so this prana has a lot to do with controlling the body as a whole. The Upanishads illustrate the importance of prana with this story. The gods once held a contest to see which of them was the most essential for maintaining life. Surya, the god of vision, left a man's body, and the man immediately became blind. Then Chandra, the god of the mind, left. Not only could that man not see, he couldn't use any of his senses at all. Finally, Vayu got up to leave. The very moment Vayu rose from his seat, every other god was forced to rise from theirs. Vayu then sat back down, and the other gods could then return to their seats. Everyone admitted that nothing is more important to an individual's existence than Vayu, god of the breath. It's a wonderful story. You know, it really goes to show you that consciousness and our single-pointed, true motivations, the motivations are all done through prana, and the breath, Vayu, is the connection of all the gods to the nervous system. Because prana, as Vic tells us, because prana is what links consciousness to its mind and links the mind to its body, prana is the individualizing force, the agent that allows consciousness to see itself as a specific individual with a unique identity. It's our free will. The wind, Vayu, is our free will. It is the breath that individualizes, which, you know, is a painful thing in the long sweep of cosmogony, because it separates us from God. But of course, it is happening for a reason, because God seeks to experience itself authentically through the living soul. So God needs to individuate in order to be authentic, in order to not be AI, in order to not be a robot. It is Swati that is the non-roboting element of the Vedic cosmology. Beautiful to think about. I'm glad I read that nice little note. Of course, we're still here The next thing we're going to be doing is we're going to dig a little bit more into the Swati Nakshatra Sutra, because Vic goes into greater detail in describing the nature of every single word inside of the sutra. And this is what we're going to be coming up to next. This again coming from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. We're now looking at Swati, the individuator, and describing to ourselves the nature of this nakshatra. Of course, we're going to have it down here just so that we can remember, see the word and remember their meaning. Unfortunately, my software doesn't allow me to put the little Sanskrit grammar intonations. That's okay. Now let's start digging into each of the words inside of this sutra, starting with Vayu. That's the Vayor, right? And just to read this again, just so that we have it, let's do our Nakshatra Sutra one more time, just so that we have it in our brains here. Vayor nistya vratataha parastad asidhiravastat. And of course, Vic gives us the total is that the far-blowing wind needs to drift into individuation in order to produce, in order for imperfections to emerge. We need to be our individual selves beyond the group unit in order to truly speak objectively to the problems with the group unit. Right? So let's dig into Vayu. Vayu is commonly thought of the god of wind. But really, he is more truly the god of air. So thus, Vayu is an extremely important divinity. Without air, we suffocate. In fact, Vayu is the god of the most special type of life-giving air, called prana, which is approximately the modern conception of oxygen. Prana is the element that allows the non-physical mind to interface with the physical brain and nervous system. It's a type of oxygen allowing combustion of electrochemical impulses. Thus, it is prana which allows the mind to link with a specific individual body. Right? Prana is a part of the individuation force inside of all of us. Really, it's psychedelic to think that even our bodies are all consisted of the same atoms of matter. The atoms inside of my body have been shared with yours. It's all stardust spewing from the Big Bang. We are all one in nature. So what makes us individuals is our neurological connection to our divine individuated agency of God. We are all our own individuated agency. Our bodies are one. But it's prana. It's the movement of motive, of psyche within ourselves that allows us to be individuated. Now let's peek into this next word, nistya. That's what we've got right here. What we read is that the stars that divine Swati. Ah, yes, I've heard this. Vic has a whole video where he describes how the stars of the nakshatras are an intrinsic and connected part of the nakshatras. And there's always a star, and sometimes the stars are very far off of the ecliptic. The stars that divine Swati are very far north of the ecliptic. They're the most far north. This has to do with the flag nature of Swati. It goes far off. It's considered to be a faraway flag, so you can see wind as well as possible danger coming. So the stars that define Swati are very far north of the ecliptic. And according to Vic, this is the fundamental reason why the sutra describes those stars of Swati as nistya, something that has wandered far away into foreign territory. The more we identify with a specific individual body, the more we run the risk of drifting further away from the true root of who and what we really are. Today, the nakshatra is not often called nistya. It's more commonly called Swati, a name that implies a great deal, ati, of individuality, which is sva. Svaha. Sva has to do with this individuation. So Swati is something that is very individuated. It's interesting that nistya almost relates in the same way, except that Vic is giving this interesting turnaround to describe that the nistya ascribed to Swati, in a way it goes far away from the self in order that it can more deeply recognize where the root is of the true self. Now, our next word is vratati. And so Vic tells us of vratati. Vratati means expansion and extension. That's our word at the bottom here, vratatihi. It describes vines because they grow long and thin very quickly. That's what the root of vratatihi is. They expand and they extend. The concept of vratati is not of expansion in all directions, but in one direction, like an elongating ray, which is interesting. It's a little bit different from how I thought it would be. But it makes sense in the case of this individuation process, where Swati will go very far in one direction, and it does have a single pointedness to it, which I imagine must serve Swati so it doesn't become too scattered, although it can still become scattered. So part of the character of Swati Nakshatra is to extend like a ray in a single direction. And that's what causes it to become very individuated. It's what causes these people can be like conspiracy nuts, or people who really dig deeply into the chinks or cracks in the foundation of anything, of a political sphere, of a building, of a company, of a relationship, etc. Now we have our word asiddhi, and we know what this relates to in the way of imperfections. Asiddhi means imperfection, failure, and non-completion. If I'm not mistaken, it doesn't say this, but let me see, siddhi, like asiddhi, S-I-D-D-H-I, like not asiddhi, but this thing which we call siddhis are like powers, and they represent a perfection. So asiddhi, whenever you have an A in front of something, it's the negation of that. So asiddhir is kind of like the opposite of perfection. It's failure, it's non-completion. So Vic brings to mind exactly what I said, which is, it's interesting here that this nakshatra seems to have a negative object, or a negative objective, right? This is the avastat. Vratatihi parastat is what is the foundation from above, and then asiddhir avastat is what's produced. That's what this nakshatra produces. So why is the objective of Swati to produce this apparently negative objective? We can also translate asiddhi as non-compliance. This translation may help to show Swati's true objective in a more favorable manner. Swati seeks to be non-compliant with imperfections. So when we think of acid here as non-compliance, that really gives it a different ring to it, doesn't it? So in summary, just to summarize what we've learned about Swati here, Swati signifies individuation, which sets one apart from the main group. The individuation needs freedom to move in its own direction, vratitehe, so that it is not unduly forced to comply with the group. That's asiddhi. Acid here. Swati allows the individual to avoid conforming with norms it does not value, and in the process carries the individual far away from the imperfect social group. We read that Swati likes to exaggerate and push the envelope. By pushing things to their limit, vratiti, Swati reveals their flaws, asiddhi. This allows us to remove those flaws and throw them, Vayu, far away, nistya. So by pushing the envelope and pushing things to their limit, Swati reveals their flaws. This allows us to remove those flaws and throw them far away. That is the true essence of Swati. It's a great summary. Vic really has an excellent way of tying it all together, in my opinion. Wonderful. That was amazing. I love talking about these nakshatras, and I just love the way that Vic Dicara does it. He does it like nobody else. Now, stay tuned here, folks, because the next part of this reading, we're going to get into the interpretive nature of this nakshatra. I'm all backwards. There we go. What can we read into regarding the interpretive information that Vic Dicara has to give about planets falling into this lunar asterism of the nakshatra Swati? Again, for the sake of most of us as tropical Vedic astrologers for watching this video, let's remember that if you have any planets, oh, I got it. Excuse me here, folks. I'm getting used to my technology still. If you have any planets falling into, but let's say about between 0 degrees Scorpio and 14 degrees of Scorpio. That's a general indication. That is inside of both of these men's map of where Swati is. Thankfully, Swati and Ernst and Vic don't disagree too much on the position of Swati. They do disagree on other nakshatras, but Swati's not one of them. So if you have any planet between 0 degrees Scorpio and about 13 degrees of Scorpio, it's probably a Swati planet, and it can be regarded through this interpretation. So, Vic Dicara tells us excuse me. Just like with the signs, where I often say a planet falling into a zodiac sign not only affects the planet, it also affects the sign. Oh, Stephen, you've definitely got some Jupiter. Stephen the Jupiterian has Jupiter at 4 degrees Scorpio. That's definitely Swati. When a planet falls into a sign, it does something to the sign as well as to the planet. If those planets are friends, if they're neutral, if the planet that rules the sign is good friends with the planet, if there's afflictions there, or if there's delight there, then if there's positive aspect between friends, that is going to do something to the sign, and as well, it's also going to do something to the nakshatra. So you can have a planet that does well here, but if it's like conjunct Saturn and being combusted by the sun, even if it does well in Swati typically, there's going to be an affliction in Swati there. So this is how we have to think of this. So in general, when Swati functions well, it allows us to expand into a new, far-off realm, free from imperfections imposed on us initially. It allows us to purify things of their flaws and fix the faults it finds. If you have the rising sign or the moon falling here, this will probably be indicative of a very deep theme in your life. But if you have any planets here who are functioning well, this is what's going to be allowed to happen. And if there are afflictions to planets here, then this will have difficulty happening. Now, what would these afflictions manifest as? Let's go through some examples to see how Vic would describe what affliction might look like, because it's going to look different for different planets. Now, the first thing that Vic says is a little bit of good news for Swati. A lot of the times, many of the nakshatras, being lunar, are generally trying to... most of the nakshatras, they're of Vishnu in a way. They kind of want to just live their life. Like us inside of our sun is really something that, there's good and bad in the solar ecliptic, in the solar zodiac. Most of the lunar nakshatras convey, because they're of the moon, the nakshatras are created by the movement of the moon, if you understand it. So the moon has to do with what we need to be comfortable. It's our environment. It's what we need to feel happy. And most of the nakshatras we would hope that there's positive things going on in the nakshatra in order that we can have a comfortable experience with whatever's associated there. This is one of the only nakshatras that I've read so far in this series where we have the nodes and Saturn and Mars as finding a good home in Swati. Rahu and Ketu, Saturn and Mars are interesting because they are typically difficult planets, but here they find a good home in Swati. The non-compliant nature of the nodes is a good match for this nakshatra, allowing it to function well. I'm going to talk more about the nodes in just a moment, but it's good to know that they function well naturally in Swati. Now, the individuality of Mars is similar. There's a non-compliant nature in Mars that is well served to, Mars it's the third planet after the sun and moon in the Vedic pantheon. Sunday is the sun, Monday is the moon, Tuesday, Mardi, is Mars. So Mars is a necessary affirming your boundaries, gripping the goals and things that you think are important to you. So having Mars in Swati is one planet where you're well served to individuate for the sake of your boundaries, the things of your creating. Mars is the warrior planet, and it's the red planet that we can understand why it'd be well served for Mars to be non-compliant. When it comes to the things that you need, that you are creating your reality through, it's useful to have Mars here. Now, Saturn is associated with Vayu. In fact, Vata would be the more concise thing here. Vata is like the Ayurvedic dosha of wind, of windiness, and it's also the air tattva. It's one of the primordial 5 elements. And Saturn is the arbiter of the air tattva. So Saturn also does not like to conform with norms established by centralized powers. Saturn is sort of a way of, I often describe it as developing healthy coping mechanisms with reality. And you don't necessarily want, Saturn needs to develop its coping mechanisms in its own way of how it survives. It doesn't want to necessarily depend on other people. It's interesting because Saturn's individuation is actually well served. Saturn's exalted in Libra. So it's an individuating planet that is well served in Libra because that individuation allows it to not get wrapped up. It can be selfless and serviceful, and it allows itself to be combined with others in a way that serves the self and everybody else involved. Saturn in Aries is too individuating. It's interesting that here we see that Saturn, the individuation nature of Saturn, does well falling into Swati. Saturn is associated with Vayu and does not like to conform with established norms established by centralized powers. So Saturn, Mars, and the nodes, any of these planets in Swati, suggests significant determination to be an individual and to evolve into something different from one's initial family and social expectations. Strictly speaking, this is a tropical Vedic astrology podcast. And I'd like to say, it's unfortunate 2,000 years from now, this information might not be relevant. But at the present time, since Swati is covered by 0 degrees Scorpio to about 13 degrees Scorpio, we can see that the Saturn is going to be in Scorpio here, which means it's happy in Swati, but it's a little bit afflicted because it's not happy in Scorpio. It has Mars for an enemy. Mars in Swati is a very happy place. I was going out with a girlfriend for a long time who had Mars in Scorpio and Swati. Of course, Scorpio is ruled by Mars. So there's a tough individuation process where Mars is here that can be very healthy. It's well served not only by Swati but also by Scorpio. So Swati favors maverick, self-governing, and self-defining individuals. But it causes difficulty in partnerships and cooperation. So planets like Venus and Mercury here in Swati indicate challenges in romantic and social relationships. The moon here indicates challenges in family relationships and difficulty remaining on course, being with the program, right? Swati moon people can still find emotional happiness and find relationship happiness, but they'll probably find that, especially because the moon is debilitated in Scorpio, especially from 0 to 3 degrees of Scorpio, having the moon in Swati is a dangerous place to have the moon in today's time. It's the moon's deep debilitation point. So again, this is only because that's where we are in the 24,000 year cycle. So the moon in Swati is very close. It's in the sign of the moon's debilitation. And this individuation process of Swati is even more maverick, loner. I really need to be my own individuated self, untethered to anything in order to be truly happy. But Swati just needs to recognize that if they do want to partner, and they very much still can, depending on what's going on in the rest of the chart. if they do desire a partner, them and their partner need to recognize that this is just a part of their energy and to make peace with it, essentially. And to develop a capacity to communicate on and make space for the need of the Swati moon person to kind of do their own thing. Especially with the moon debilitated in Scorpio here. The moon is used to sort of going into its own world, going out into an ambitious career, pushing and fighting to make money or resources or make powerful connections to bring home the bacon. They bring home the bacon to their wife or their husband and say, this is how much I love you. And it's cute, but it's not a shared sense of love. That's true of the moon in Scorpio generally, and it's exacerbated with the moon in Swati. So definitely keep that in mind. When Swati malfunctions, it generates excessive need for change. This is when Swati is overdoing it. Oh, hello there, one rare bird. It is Thursday, Jupiter's day. It's nice to see you, amigo. Thanks for hanging out with us. So when Swati malfunctions, it generates excessive need for change. It has an overabundant individuation function happening. So this makes us drift off course, vratiti, from our original intentions and plans. And therefore, often we will diverge and drift so much off course that we might not complete our goals. This is when the vratiti, produces an asidir that is not actually, it's like actually negative. You know, we want to use the negativity of individuation for positive purposes. But there are times when the individuation, the Swati person or with a certain planet can get stuck there and then get stuck in this mentality. Now, the sun, which is supposed to be a stable planet, constantly their whole life they're working towards their dharma, working towards the vision that they have of themselves, what they're wanting to be and create in this world. So the stable sun in Swati brings out this implication. And this also signifies clashes with authority figures. The sun in Swati, the sun is authority. So the Swati sun person probably wants to be their own authority in a way, and they'll get into clashes with authority. Jupiter can bring out this same theme, but it's a bit milder. And Jupiter in Swati can sometimes suggest clashes with traditional teachers and priests. So the sun is probably grouped in with Venus, Mercury, and the moon as not being a great place for a planet. Of course, this also depends on what the planet rules, what its Bhavesha is. You know, maybe we'll bring some examples just to show. I was doing that last time and it worked out pretty well. So let's just say what the heck and bring out just some examples. So let's say, for example, that we have a person with the chart of what the heck, eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Let's pick Taurus rising. Do I have this ready yet? No, I do not. All right, let's go with Aries. Yeah. So what we have here is the chart of an Aries rising. And we can imagine that, you know, let's say, for example, what does the sun rule for Aries rising? It rules the 5th house. So if we have the 5th house lord, the sun, is falling into Swati up here in Scorpio in the 8th house. Scorpio is a friend to, well, Scorpio is Aries' other ruling sign, ruled by Mars. So having the sun fall into the auspicious 8th house. The 8th house is auspicious for Aries. And the sun has Mars for a friend in Scorpio. The sun's still pretty close to its debilitation point here, but we have the sun in Swati in the 8th house. The 5th lord is in the 8th house. Here we would see that the 5th Bhavesha is overall, there's positive implications in a lot of ways here. But what we read is that the stable sun in Swati brings out the implication of drifting and not fully completing our goals. So this is somebody who is an Aries rising, who has the sun up there in Swati, with the unstable 8th house kind of bring out more of this. This is probably somebody who really seeks power and wants to use their 5th house creativity. They almost have a romantic desire to involve themselves in other people through the 8th house. And they'll probably get groups together who have ideas for some deep running, very brilliant idea. Maybe it's a business, whatever it is. They ultimately, where's my mouse? Come on. I don't know why I don't see my, whatever. They will get so wrapped up and put in a lot of energy into that 8th house. And it's likely the sun being the 5th lord in the 8th house, they're probably very passionate about dumping energy and investment and time into one deep running research project. They're passionate. They're 5th house romantic and passionate about researching with other people to create some powerful think tank group that will push them into some brilliant idea or some kind of entrepreneurial venture, what have you. It's very likely that it's possible that this person with the sun in Swati will find themselves drifting from the group that they have been trying to build with. They'll find that they'll put a lot of money and effort and energy and investment into this thing, but they'll find, for whatever reason, whatever floats their cosmic boat, they have to drift from this thing that they've put a lot of energy and intention into. They have a deeper dharma. I got really, really deep into my dharma with this thing, but I can't complete it with you guys. I want to buy you guys out. You guys can take the rest or whatever. If it's a well-placed sun, which in this case, it's not the worst placement of the sun, that's probably how it's going to go. You can probably buy yourself out. Peace and love, everybody. Wow, it was very nice. And you get a little bit of money from it. It wasn't exactly the biggest waste in the world. And now they get to continue it on. Other placements with other planets might go crazier than this. But the sun in this case, it's probably because they've got a deeper dharma somewhere. There's something else that I have to go for. That's the vratitihi, right? The sun, which is supposed to have a solid dharma, has now drifted into another dharma. This is the changeable nature of Swati working through the sun. So I wanted to give at least one example of my world of combining tropical Vedic astrology and the Zodiac with, the Bhaveshas of the Zodiac, having the 5th lord falling into the 8th house. That's the 5th lord in the 5th Bhavesha in the 8th Bhava in Swati as the sun. Now, before we end this part of our reading, Stephen the Jupiterian asked, does Vedic astrology have solar return charts? And I believe they do, Stephen. It's not something that I believe that solar return charts. Is that like when you have your birthday and there's a chart that is created or resonates with it? I should say it's not something I've studied because I'm busy with all this other stuff that I'm studying. But I have a feeling that I've seen Ernst Wilhelm talk about it. So he'd probably be a better guy to ask than me. But thank you for asking. I'd rather just say that I don't know something than pretend that I do. But I always like when people ask questions because it gets me in tune with what else is out there outside of my own blind spots, But I digress. Before we get into the last part of our reading, let's talk a little bit about Rahu and Ketu inside of Swati. I always try to take a bit of time with Rahu and Ketu. So the narrative of Rahu and Ketu is blended in with whatever its opposite is. If Ketu is in Swati, the liberation of Ketu in Swati is going to have a lot to do with wherever Rahu is falling. And Rahu, if Rahu is in Swati, I wouldn't be able to see what's opposite Swati in my head. Gosh. Swati. So it's probably either Kritika. I'm just looking. It's got the wheel on Vic's book. Swati is probably the last sign where I'll be able to do this. It's probably either Kritika or possibly Bharani is the opposite of Swati. It's either that or Bharani and Ashwini. Yeah, I don't know, but you would have to figure that out, and you'd have to consider that whatever is going on with the opposite point is going to say a lot about the narrative of the node in Swati. But let's say if Ketu first, we always start with Ketu because that's the past life, that's the root. If Ketu is in Swati, there's need for this person. They've probably been a very individuated person all their lives. Throughout their childhood, they were probably pushed to experience this individuation. And it probably served them well because, as Vic tells us, the nodes are well served with the theme of non-conformity. The nodes have this way of, we've been so stuck in a certain point that we treat it brusquely or we treat it objectively. Rahu is a genius in its own way in its nakshatra, but Ketu is a genius in its nakshatra, but it's like it's sick of its genius there. It's done enough of it and it wants to get away from it. So for the sake of Ketu and Swati, we have somebody who needs to master individuation. That's what's implied by Ketu and Swati. They need to master the individuation process, and they probably think that they have. This is how Ketu works, is that we probably think that we've done enough individuating. We think that we are a genius maverick thinker, and I've always been this thing. But it's probably more likely the case that you probably are that if you have Ketu and Swati. But there is a way to master it so that you can be, it's almost like Ketu and Swati will individuate themselves so much initially that they can't operate properly in the world. And they get obsessed with their individuation process so much that they haven't got mastered it. They go too far into it. And it's at that point that they go so far out of society, they sort of maroon themselves from dealing with other people. And this causes them to kind of be forced when Rahu goes up towards, when at our 9th birthday, our 18th birthday, our 27th birthday, our 36th birthday, we're going like a kundalini snake. We're going from the one node to the other node to the other. So when, at your 18th birthday and your 36th birthday, you tend to be moving more towards Rahu and the opposite of Ketu. And it's there that we find mastery of Ketu. That's where we master Ketu, is in some ways when we go towards Rahu. And when we go towards Rahu, we're probably going to get out of our individuation process. At our 18th birthday, the Ketu is the flag that we've already conquered. We've already conquered this individuation. Now I need to go into the darkness of the jungle. And I need to see what's out there. And depending on whatever sign or whatever nakshatra Rahu is in, there's going to be some story there that relates to me integrating my individuation process into the Rahu desires and needs of the Rahu nakshatra. And it's in those moments where we find the true meaning and purpose of our marooned, isolated individual genius. so that we can master it, so we can become one with it. And then we eventually come back to Ketu. We learn use the lessons of Rahu as the face, as to graft onto our genius, so that our genius, so we're not so far away from the world that we can't use, that our individuality is not a detriment to us. We want our individuation to serve the greater part of who we are in a group. Again, if you're in some kind of group, you're in some other sphere, then your individuation can be of service to that group, so you can survive better, you can live your life better. This is the truly flowing with the Ketu nature of the nakshatra, is that you don't get so sucked into it that it eats you. You want to let it be channeled through a balanced and harmonious life. I imagine it's very likely that the two nakshatras that Rahu could be in this case probably have something to do with bridging the gap between individuation and social collective merging. Now, in any case, Ketu here, this obsessive component of individuation, is probably going to still serve you well. And that's a nice thing to hear, because Ketu is a bitch. It's the most important part of Vedic astrology and astrology in general. So to have that well placed is a very much in service to personal evolution. I'll have to call them back. It's my dentist. So now for our next bit, let's just talk a bit about Rahu. But you can see Rahu would be a very similar story. Ketu is going to be in the sign opposite Swati. It's going to probably be one or two. It could be one or the other. And the narrative of Rahu is going to be produced out of getting sick of wherever Ketu is. So wherever Ketu is, being stuck on it throughout childhood and for the large part of your early years gets boring and annoying. And so the individuation point of Swati has an essential part of your nature in it. And you've almost ignored it. It's something that you haven't done in the past. But there's a part of you that is very much in the Rahu Nakshatra. There's a part in all of us that is gleaming like a gem inside the heart of its sign and its nakshatra. And we go towards it, but it's almost too much. It's too strange. You know, you'd be amazed and surprised at how much your life changes in the key moments where we go through Rahu and Ketu maturations, where I thought that I had Rahu figured out, but then, oh boy, I turned 36, I turned 43, I turned 48, and my relationship with Rahu was completely different than I could ever have thought possible. It's our completion. And so the completion that Rahu in Swati represents probably basically means that we are looking again to, in a positive way, you know, the individuation process of Swati is going to help us master whatever's going on with Ketu. It's going to help us. It's going to be a necessary part of us dealing with whatever's going on with Ketu. It'll likely be Ketu in Taurus, right? At least for those of us in today's time. So those with Rahu in Swati do need to lean into this individuation. They will sometimes feel like they need to confront things. They need to tear things away, pull them apart in order to dismantle them, to see their essence, and then put Humpty back together again. You just got to be careful when you have any planet in Swati that you make sure that you can put Humpty back together again. If you're in a relationship and you find that you get to the heart of some complication between the two of you, or something that's been bothering the two of you, usually a person with Rahu or Ketu in Swati is going to do it well. They're going to say, you know what, there's this thing that's been going on between us for a long time. It's this. It's fucking this. This is ruining our relationship. Let's talk about it. Let's just fucking deal with it so that it is not there anymore. Or at least that we can compromise on it. We just need to talk about it because we haven't talked about it, and now we're talking about it. It's the nodes in any, with anything, they're like that. But the nodes here, especially if, the dispositors of Rahu and Ketu are well placed, if you've got good things going on in your chart generally in terms of emotional relationship communication, you'll be able to, it's a very useful thing. It's a beautiful thing. This is somebody who can have a perfect relationship because they are always willing to dig into the ugly stuff. They're always willing to speak to the frustrating aspects that are breaking down our relationship. This is true of a personal relationship. It's true of a business partnership. It's true of a political national collective. Somebody with Rahu or Ketu in Swati can be regarded as someone who just can't help but speak to the imperfections going on in a small or large situation. We should really look to group leaders in the world who have this sort of maverick thinking. This is the type of people who have planets here in Swati who will really go against the grain and talk about things that no one else dares to talk about. And that could be well in the service of society to have a person like that regarded with reverence and respect. But of course, we got to just make sure that the Swati doesn't become an acid that melts the container that holds it. To finish with the case of Rahu, all of this goes to say that this pointing out of imperfections is very good so long as you don't melt the container that holds the combustible acid of Swati. Ruins the relationship, ruins the job, ruins whatever it is, unless that thing isn't good for you. And that, in which case, that Rahu and Swati carrying you away from that nistya, the wind carrying you away from that imperfect thing, was probably in service to you. In most cases, for the nodes, it's probably the case that it was good for you to get away from that thing, to individuate. So keep that in mind, that can be healthy. Just make sure, again, with the nodes, Saturn's a difficult one, but with the nodes and Mars, especially in Swati, your individuation process, you should just always follow it. Just for anyone with anything in Swati, especially people with afflicted planets here. And this includes Saturn because in our day and age it's in Scorpio, but also the Sun, any of the other personal planets, even Jupiter. Make sure that your individuation is not just being nitpicky. You got to choose your battles. Make sure you're not throwing out a thing that is good just because you want to get away from it. You want to individuate. You know that your bread is buttered on the side of getting away from things that don't serve you. That's Swati. Make sure that you don't leave something that is good for you just because it's not perfect. Because nothing is perfect. Don't listen to the squeakiest wheel and throw the whole thing out just because of one squeaky little axle. The whole vehicle could still work very well. So keep that in mind for anyone who's got this Swati consciousness. Yes, and happy birthday, Stephen the Jupiterian. Stephen has his birthday coming up in 2 days, and I love to see that. Now, something I wanted to say. Coco Monroe. Damn. Gosh, I should have said it when I saw it, and I got distracted. Coco, my dear, if you're still watching, or for anybody who's interested and who's still watching, please feel free to email me. You can email me at astrology@dustincormier.net. Anybody, anytime, can email me at astrology@dustincormier.net, and I'll be able to do your chart reading. I don't usually dig into the nakshatras this much unless somebody really is asking for that, and that's what they're specifically looking for. I mostly just do my own thing. I let the chart speak for itself, But I digress. Anybody who would be interested, feel free to do that. I'm always open for more sessions. And I hope Coco Monroe sees that, because that person seemed to ask for it specifically. I wish I jumped on that sooner. So, folks, that was wonderful. Before I get into that, that was our interpretation of planets falling into the nakshatra of Swati. Vic Dicara really is such a great person to lean on when it comes to reading about nakshatras. But we have one more thing of Vic Dicara's to read. He gives us a little life lesson as to all the things that we are reading in the Nakshatra Sutras. When we read about all this stuff, we learn again that just like Scorpio or Aries or Taurus, these are archetypes that live within us, even if there's no planets there. The same thing is true of Swati. Even if there's no planets in Swati, it's still important for us to see what Swati is as a natural part of humanity, of spirit and metaphysical truth. So what we read is this sutra, Swati, the sutra of Swati, which we read down here in the bottom. It teaches us the difference between a rebel and a rebel without a cause. It also addresses the cultural question of whether or not nonconformity is something that should be suppressed or encouraged. A rebel is a person who sees the flaws and mistakes in the circumstances that fate initially drops them into and makes every effort to distance themselves from those shortcomings. This is Swati done right. This sort of nonconformity is very healthy for the individual and the society because it allows the social unit to evolve and grow past its initial imperfections. Beautiful. Such a good way to word it. Now, here is the other dimension of this, is the rebel without a cause. It's Swati individuating for the sake of individuation in a way that doesn't serve the person or the people that it's associated with. A rebel without a cause. And remember, this is a very depictive of afflictions in Swati. A rebel without a cause is a person who does not want to conform with social norms, but doesn't have a clear reason why. And thus, they don't have a clear idea of a better alternative. They're like winds that try to blow without a destination. Movement cannot proceed without a destination. This is an almost anarchistic mentality. So much rebellion and nonconformity only produces anxiety and anger in the individual and does not have a significant purifying effect on the social unit. It's individuation gone wrong. Individuation taken to an extreme at the expense of the goodness of the unit that it's intended for. So this is what we have to watch out in the case of Swati gone overblown. Very clear, very wonderful wording on the part of Vic Dicara here. Now we have one last little reading here. This comes from Nakshatra Sutra. It's Taittiriya Brahmana, the third chapter or mandala of the Taittiriya Brahmana. They give these little prayers or supplications that kind of give more information and sort of an obeisance to the kind of a prayer or a meditation on the spirit of Vayu that lives in the nakshatra of Swati. sort of one of the remedies in a way. Just like how each planet has remedies that we could apply to it through mantra, etc. This is like a nakshatra remedy in a way. And this is how Vic translates it. Nistya Nakshatra moved towards Vayu, making an auspicious noise like a bull, causing the air to blow, blowing away all haters and obstructions. May Vayu in the nakshatra Nistya Swati hear our supplication. May this nakshatra and her god bring us wise wealth to satisfy and fulfill our longings, carrying us far across all evil obstacles and difficulties. Beautiful. Wonderful. I love that supplication at the end of the reading. It's always useful. That was Vic Dicara, ladies and gentlemen. Truly a genius when it comes to these nakshatras and their sutras and defining them. Now we have one more reading left. It's a long video today, because I know that this next bit is also a long one. Next up, we are going to read about Swati, the Swati native, one more time. Vayu being Indra's charioteer. Now, I've been doing a series where I talk about each of the deities of the nakshatras. The deities of the nakshatras, in particular Vayu, they all have their stories in the Vedas. And that video is available here on my YouTube channel. I'm going to produce it as a second video. So you can probably watch it. I'm probably going to put I'm getting used to how to do YouTube. You can check it out in this video here, and we'll do that at the very end when we do our end screen. So for now, we have one more reading, and this is about the native of the Swati Nakshatra. And this is going to come from another book. It's The Divine Forces of the Lunar Nakshatras as Portrayed in the Vedas by an author who goes by the name of Radhe. She's great. She's a wonderful researcher. She really, when she goes through her research on the deity throughout the Vedas, she talks about Vayu in the Vedas from various different parts of it. And she says which book, which Veda each one comes from. It's very useful information. I highly recommend the book for that sake. I always like to say, though, let's keep in mind the caveat that she is a traditional Indian astrologer, which means her writing is subject to some of the distortion that we've described, where much of her idea of the nakshatra comes from the notion that Swati falls into Libra, and that Libra has something to do with the airy quality of Swati, which is not the case. Because Libra was written, the idea of Libra came 1500 years after the Nakshatra Sutras were written of the Taittiriya Brahmana. So the Vayu of the essential nakshatra is something different from the air of Libra. Especially because in today's time, Swati actually falls into Scorpio. So this author, we have to keep that in mind when we read her writing. But I always like to include her writing because the Indian people are the only ones who have information on these nakshatras. So hearing the take of someone who's been dealing with Swati Nakshatra, their tradition has been dealing with it for 2,000 years or more. So it's useful to hear their take on it. We just have to make sure in our minds to remember to separate the wheat from the chaff in this way. Let's be discerning as we take on the reading of a traditional Indian writer as to the nature of the Swati Nakshatra native. Right? So let's dig in. This is the Swati native. We read, Nistya, outcast. That's this word that we see down here. I'm going to take this off now because we don't really need it. Nistya, which means outcast or strewn away, carried away. Nistya is the ancient appellation for Swati. It indicates the remote placement of this nakshatra from the ecliptic, as Vic Dicara noted. The actual star that represents Swati is far away from what we would call the solar ecliptic. Nistya also suggests, as does the antelope, which is Vayu's vehicle in the Purana texts, that there's a solitary nature in the native, whose preference for seclusion often results in a sense of not belonging to anywhere, to anyone, to anything. At times, the native's need for aloneness may turn into an overwhelming sense of loneliness. Now, many attributes of the native. I just want to try one thing. Looking at my camera here. I'm going to try that. Many attributes of the Swati native are directly derived from the inherent nature of Vayu, which is a devata who represents the air tattva, the element of air or wind. So the Swati native has a compelling need for movement, speed, and change. This explains Swati's restless and possibly impulsive temperament. Now, the author Radhe gives us some cool little examples here. You can look to the bhava placement or the bhava rulership of the Swati planet to see where such attributes manifest in life. For example, if it's the second bhava bhavesha, then this person will speak with great rapidity or they'll eat hastily, right? So let's say, for example, just to show you guys what we're talking about here, what do we mean by bhavesha? Let me see. Present, share screen. I gotta get used to using my technology here still. Come on, show me the thing. Okay, this is here. Oh, come on, why aren't you giving it to me? I just gotta see if this is gonna give me what I want here. It's not. You'll have to excuse me for a moment, folks. Okay. Present, share screen, Windows. Yeah, that's the one. So you guys should see me now. Great. Thanks for your patience here, folks. So this is Aries rising, just to show an example. Let's say the second bhavesha. So the bhava means house. So bhavesha means house lord. So when we read, our author Radhe says, if the second bhava bhavesha falls into Swati, then the person speaks with great rapidness and or will eat hastily. So if you have an Aries rising and Venus is in Swati, the second house kind of relates. Venus is channeling the second house. And the second house relates with eating and as well as speaking. So they might eat or speak very quickly. Now, we already gave this example. If the fifth lord falls into Swati, let's say if it's an Aries rising and the sun falls into Swati, then the person speaks with great excuse me. If the fifth lord falls into Swati, in the case of Aries, this would be the sun. If the sun for an Aries rising falls into Swati, then the mind is quick, but it's also very changeable. There's an intelligence and a discernment that is quick but changeable. Now, if the third bhava bhavesha, in this case for Aries rising, we would see that Mercury rules Gemini, which is the third house. So we have Aries rising and Mercury falls into Swati. Then perhaps the native engages in sports or creative activities that require a fleetness of hands, a real quickness, a quick observation of things moving. It's not so much like football, but more like this would be like ping pong or quick mind games where you need to be very visually, have to have the quick visual acuity and a quick mind to change things up. You know, maybe charades would be a good example. It's just me thinking on the top of my head. Right? But those are some examples of some of those falling into Swati. It's cool that the author gives these ideas, you know. Now, Vayu's modus operandi is perpetual motion and travel. And the native cherishes the ability to move about in the world in whatever direction the wind takes them. Again, when we say the native, I should have mentioned this from the beginning, you know, in Vedic astrology, it's if your moon or your rising sign fall into Swati, that's most essentially what we mean when we're talking about the Swati native. If the moon or the rising sign are falling into this nakshatra, then you will really see the character quality of this nakshatra coming through in that native. Right? So this is somebody for whom the ability to move about in the world in whichever direction the wind takes them is very important. An intuitive personality can come through here, where they just don't feel satisfied until they've found something that nestles into their roots that is perfect in a way, although they'll never find that perfection. But the least imperfect is what Swati is ultimately looking for. Now, at the root of this desire to move about by the wind, the root of this is a love of freedom. Anything that suggests permanency or requires the establishment of deep roots is likely to be met with resistance from the Swati native. Perhaps for this reason, Swati's symbol is a small little shoot with very shallow roots. The young shoot, swaying with the movement of the wind, also represents this native's ability to remain flexible and adaptable, to go with the flow. The native is likely an expert at adjusting to frequent changes in life. Indeed, his own development and growth depend on his ability to thrive in environments that are constantly evolving. So they're expert at adjusting to frequent changes, and they depend on this wind, on this change, on mixing things up. This makes the native particularly knowledgeable and skilled in the area of transition management. So perhaps this person consults organizations on the issue of transition management. Alternatively, see, like that's a good career for the Swati person. And alternatively, the native may be a life coach who assists individuals through periods of great change and uncertainty, as well as a small shoot in the ground whose growth is hampered by the ever-shifting wind. Swati is also symbolized by a flag blowing in the wind. So Swati and its native is at times figured as the wavering shoot, the little plant, or a waving flag. Yet Swati also represents the powerful force behind their movement. Yeah, I see what it's saying, and it's going to talk about, I remember I've read this already. they're kind of like a espionage person, or they could be a political speaker who speaks about overarching looming changes that are coming. Just like a flag is blowing in the wind, we know, oh, there's a storm coming. In the same way, Swati can represent the powerful force behind the movement of something. And Swati will speak to it. You know, they put their ear to the ground and see, oh, there's a stampede coming that way. That kind of thing. Now, the Lord Vayu is called Ishanam, the most powerful. It's a daunting and destructive atmospheric power. Vayu is also likened to the sharp horn of a bull, and his razor-like power is easily felt by others. So don't be fooled by this native. There's an indomitable force hidden behind its apparently otherwise detached demeanor. A flag waving violently in the air alerts others to powerful forces. Is the moon? Oh my gosh. Thank you, Thriller Kid. Is it really? Wow. And today, the Thriller Kid has mentioned to us that the moon is in Swati right now. That is amazing. That's sick. If that, I don't know if that's the case, but if it is, amazing. What an amazing time to be reading about Swati. Thank you, Thriller Kid. So, a flag waving violently in the air alerts others to powerful forces not readily perceived from a distance. Similarly, the native of Swati may serve as an informant for the government or as some kind of an undercover agent. Now, our author gives us an example. We see this aspect of Swati is profiled in the life of a person named Julian Assange. Assange was the founder of WikiLeaks. And this person had their moon in Swati, so they are the true native of Swati. Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, made a career in distributing information advertently withheld from the public. Determined to expose the wrongdoings of governments and corporations, this Swati native, Julian Assange, is dubbed the whistleblower. Assange's early childhood is indicative of the shifting and changing nature of Swati. He's said to have lived a nomadic life. He and his mother moved from one town to another, attempting to escape the notice of an ex-husband. Later, this founder of WikiLeaks relentlessly traveled throughout the world to set up an important infrastructure for his company. Today, Assange has taken refuge in a single room at the Embassy of Ecuador in London. Although in the midst of a major metropolitan center, he is isolated from the rest of the world. That individuating factor. Very interesting. So I do love this author. You know, she's got some great ideas about each nakshatra, you know. What's nice is that she mentions what the root of her argument comes from. She doesn't say because Libra, you know, she says because Vayu, Vayu being the god of wind. This is where all her intimations are coming from. Here we read, Vayu is also known as Vata in the Rig Veda. Now, this is important for the health of the person in Swati. Vayu, or Vata, being composed of the air element. Vata is one of the 3 Ayurvedic doshas, which can mean imbalance. So on the mental level, the versatility of Vata expresses itself through an endless flow of creative ideas and thoughts. It gives clarity, alertness, an imaginative mind, freshness, and spontaneity. Interestingly, our author gives an example of Robin Williams, who had the rising sign in Swati. Robin Williams was Swati Lagna. He displayed these attributes. Robin Williams was known for his expert improvisations, and his sense of humor was as clever as it was spontaneous. He is so Swati. I'm glad that this example is here. There's funny things. In the Disney movie Aladdin, they wanted to have Robin Williams play the genie. So Robin Williams is a spontaneity guy. He's not just bringing stuff up from inside of his mind. He's also looking with a great acuity at the things all around him. So the creators of Aladdin brought Robin Williams in and said, okay, so you're this genie. We want to animate you looking at a bunch of possessions and precious little items and wares. So what they did is they brought Robin Williams into a room where he's got little genie lamps, little items, little beads, little metallic cups and jars and clay jars and all these different things. And Robin Williams comes in and just improvises. He improvises. Oh, this thing. Oh, God, I wish I could bring up a clip or something like that from that scene in Aladdin where it's the genie. Look at all these amazing things here. Look at all these things. Oh, this thing here could do this. Oh, look, wow, this thing could do this thing, can't it? Oh, this thing is one of these. And he does all these silly things that are spontaneous and amazing, like so talented and so clever. And he's thinking of ideas that come from the things in front of him. That's the beauty of this, that's the beauty of the character of Swati, of this Vata energy, right? Although Vata can be exaggerated, it really makes you think of whether this energy of Robin Williams with his drug habit of getting into, I think he got into cocaine, got into a bunch of things that really messed him up, makes you wonder if Vata was ungrounding, gave him a lack of grounding. So what I said from the beginning, Swati people, Vata people, need Kapha, which is the grounding earth and water dosha. So it's something to keep in mind. If you find yourself having an ADHD energy that can't be stopped, and you're a Swati native, really consider Ayurveda. Start eating some ghee. I'm too much Vata in my energy field. I've been eating ghee with everything, and it's done a lot for grounding me. So keep that in mind. So here we go. Students and practitioners of Ayurveda are intimately familiar with the term deranged Vata. A deranged or vitiated Vata is a condition that's induced by excessive movement, be it perpetual travel, non-stop texting on your phone, excessive talking, etc. Too much going on in the nervous system. The restless nature of the Swati native can easily diffuse and scatter the Vata dosha. Under such conditions, the nervous system becomes overly stressed, and symptoms like tremors, breathlessness, and heart palpitations may manifest. On the mental emotional level, you can expect symptoms associated with forgetfulness, insomnia, anxiety, insecurity, and instability to manifest on the part of the native. So we have our friend April Durham here. Thank you, April. Thank you for chiming in. April has their moon in this nakshatra. And I'm very glad for you to be sharing that you can relate to what we're talking about here. So, too much movement and too little grounding can cause the Swati native to struggle with materializing their ideas or completing their many projects. And this even brings us a little bit back to our sutra, where we've seen that asiddhir, incompletion, can be the avastat, which can be to the detriment of the native if this goes too far. Impulsiveness replaces well thought out plans, and aimless wandering negates a healthy sense of constancy. This is especially true if a changeable planet like the moon occupies Swati. So the moon's already changeable, being put in this changeable nakshatra, plus the moon is debilitated in Scorpio in today's time, really shows a whole lot of capacity for aggravation of vata inside of a moon in Swati person. It's very, very much something to keep in mind here. Now, again, just as Vic mentioned, the sun is the graha of steadfastness and consistency. So when the sun is in Swati, it may be like that little shoot, that little plant shoot, whose roots are too shallow to support independent growth and strength. So in this case, the person might bend to the needs and demands of others rather than firmly standing true in its own self. Now, the last mention that needs to be made here is that when you read this video, if you were to watch this video that we're going to be putting up soon at the end screen, we're going to learn about how Vayu's role in the Vedas and Puranas was as the chief charioteer amongst the gods. As a master charioteer, a driver, Vayu is expert in leveraging the winds, his team of horses, so that they speed him along his way rather than impeding his progress or blowing him off course. This is somebody who learns the drift of the car in front of you. You get into the drift and it can allow you to go farther. Indeed, the success Swati has to offer is contingent on the native keeping his destination point, his goals, his aspirations, and his objectives firmly in mind, and employing their creative flow of ideas to direct and steady their course rather than diffuse or divert it. Wow, I love that way this is conveyed. The winds can be these different ideas that can blow you off course, but if you let it carve into your overall destination, the winds of these new ideas and transforming ways of thinking about it can actually make you carve even deeper into the single-pointed goal that you have, if you allow that to be the case. And don't allow it to diffuse your overall goal. Importantly, Vayu's function as a charioteer of a 1,000 horse-drawn chariot suggests the ability of this native to command or administer a dynamic and powerful organization. However, that elevated position is likely to be subordinate to the president or CEO, for Vayu's main purpose as a charioteer is to deliver Indra, the monarch, the CEO of the heavens, to the sacrificial grounds, to the place where the CEO, the boss, the bigger boss, is intending to go. So Swati might find themselves, for how maverick and individuating they are, they might find themselves as the right-hand man of a very powerful person, of Indra, as Indra's charioteer, because they're the one person who will tell Indra, Indra will say, I feel like this wind is going to take us further. If we use the wind from the valley here, I believe that will be to our advantage. Vayu or Swati, the Swati Nakshatra native will say, no, sir, trust me. That bit of information, I've already dug through it. That data, that idea, that course of action and thought is only going to take us away from our bigger picture, our bottom line that we're trying to do here. Let's stay on track. It's not going to help us. Nice try, but let's keep focused on what we're doing here. So Swati is good as the second-hand man for someone else's thing. Otherwise, the individuation nature of Swati might take them away from some bigger picture, they're acidically, they might melt the container that holds the acid, which means they might be so individuated that they never do anything with it. Swati does better when they are in a group where their acid can be contained by an overall bigger purpose inside the group. right? Very useful, very wonderful way to look at it. That came from the divine forces of the Lunar Nakshatras as portrayed in the Vedas. Thank you, Radhe, who's the author. Wonderful. That felt amazing to go through this with you guys. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was our video today discussing the Swati native and the nakshatra of Swati, its meanings, its deeper purpose. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I'm Dustin Cormier. Thanks for watching. I'm writing a book right now. It's not an astrology book. I'll be writing one of those soon. But I'm writing a book. It's a novel about my journey in life with psychedelics, spirituality, and erotic poetry. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It's going to be coming out. I don't know. I'm going to be putting out part 1 first and part 2 later because it's turning out pretty long. I'm still writing it. So that's why I'm up here at a new spot at my dad's cottage. So keep your eyes out for that. Otherwise, I'm going to try to keep doing these videos once a week, every Thursday. Stay tuned for next Thursday. No, it wouldn't be next Thursday. It's the second Thursday. The second Thursday of every month, we are going to be doing cold readings. Next Thursday, I'm going to be having a guest talking about human design. I've learned recently that I'm a reflector in human design. Next week, we're going to have my friend Dylan from the... Oh, shucks, I should actually have his Instagram. He is human... His business is called Master Human Design Teacher. He was just recently featured on the Leo King's podcast. He's going to be welcomed on here to talk about human design and the reflector in human design because I'm a reflector and I want to hear all about it. So keep in mind that that stuff's coming through the pike, folks. And as well, if you enjoyed this video, if you want to learn more about Vayu, who is the charioteer of Indra, and who rules this nakshatra, check out this video right here in order to learn more about that. Thanks for watching, folks. Thanks everybody who was hanging out with us. Thriller Kid, April Durham, Stephen the Jupiterian. Keep your eyes peeled because we got more coming down the pipe, folks. Thanks for watching. Check out this video, and I'll see you guys later.